Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is Jim Spohrer with ISSIP, the International Society of Service Innovation Professionals. And for the next hour, we will be exploring the digital transformation of education. I want to turn things over pretty quickly to the co-creator of this series, really the creator of this series. He brought me in as the co-creator, Professor Vittal Prabhu of Penn State University. And for those who've been following us, about every month or so, we've been doing an industry sector and looking at the digital transformation of that sector. But let me bring up the slides. And let me bring up the slides and turn it over to Vittal. If you want to just do your opening remarks, then we'll get into introducing the panelists and go from there.
Thanks, Jim. I'm Vittal Prabhu. As Jim said, I'm a faculty in Penn State's Industrial Engineering Department. We are the first academic program in the world to offer degrees in industrial engineering. Many of our alums came back and said, hey, you trained us to be good engineers in manufacturing, but there is a bigger need for engineering mindset in the service sector. So we started pursuing that and trying to create content and advocacy around it. Work with Jim now to launch this series. So, like I said, we are the first in industrial manufacturing engineering. We also like to build the first academic program around service systems engineering at all levels, undergraduate, graduate, as well non-traditional, maybe digital micro-credentials and such. So it's a fantastic partnership to work with Jim and Michelle and other leaders of ISSIP. And I'm glad you're able to join us. And I'm sure we will have a lot of impact over a period of time. I'll now pass it on to Jim.
Great, thank you, Vittal. And I'm just going to back up for 1 minute to mention that our panelists each get 5 minutes to tell us a little bit about their work. Some will use slides, some won't. But Dan Russell, I've known the longest. Dan was a colleague of mine at Apple, at IBM, and then went over to Google, where I believe he's recently retired, but he's a famous author, The Joy of Search. And if you walk through airports, you're going to see his book sometimes there. And then we'll hear from Amanda Diekman, who is at the University of Indiana Bloomington doing some fantastic stuff with STEM and purpose. Then we're going to hear from Deb Stokes from Dell Computer, who's also our ISSIP president. And last but not least, we'll hear from Frank Mellis, who's the founder of a startup called Smart Bio that's really looking at regional economic development. And I just want to say that, you know, as we go through sort of month by month, we're taking a different sector. Coming up in October, we have retail and hospitality, then supply chain and logistics in November, and energy and information technology in December. So stay tuned for those as well. And education, of course, is what's up today. So if we look in the news, I'll take about 5 minutes to set the stage for this. But if you look in the news, you're going to see a lot of news about the digital transformation of education. Digital Promise, Jeremy Rochelle, some of you know him. They have a white paper out about the digital transformation of education. By the way, all these slides and the links will be available after the meeting. So if you're on this meeting, you're going to get a copy of the recording as well as the slides, so you can click on these. But you can search for these if you want to take a look sooner. Also, how could you miss Sal Khan of Khan Academy, talking about revolutionizing education with AI. And then there's these other voices, like I just found out about Lauren Eve Heller, and she is really more coming at this from the design perspective. And I know Deb Satterfield, for example, knows some of this work, but really coming at this more from how is this going to boost people's creativity. And then if you were on the last meeting, Kartik Gada talked about the big disruption view, his third millennium economics, and how maybe there'll be universities closing. And I think we heard from Prabhu about this. I'm actually bullish and optimistic about universities in the long run, as you'll see. But maybe we'll have some discussion about if universities don't transform, they will go away. And I do agree probably that's going to be the case. If you don't transform, your days are numbered. Um, Please go on mute if you're not speaking. Make sure you're on mute, and please put your questions, comments in the chat. And as part of this introduction to this industry sector transformation measures, I always like to say cost for computing are going down. The marginal cost of computing is going to zero, as some are saying, and I'll show you a slide on that. And productivity is going up. Service robots, AI digital twins, we haven't even really gotten the benefit of the productivity gain from AI yet, but we're seeing a constant increase in productivity year over year, and I'll show you a measure for that. And so now with the stage set, so we got the cost of computing going down, we've got people's productivity going up. What's going to happen to the education sector? So now we begin to speculate. And looking back 10 years, if we go 10 years in the future and we look back at education, from the perspective of 2034, what are the measures that's going to count? And I love this quote that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So it doesn't have to be a standard measure. A lot of people talk about trust as going to be the main thing that we've got to measure in the future. We'll see. But, here's Jensen Huang talking about the marginal cost of computing going to zero. His argument is even though his H100 costs $250,000 per unit, that replaces so much of a data center, the cables would cost more than his chip. So it's NVIDIA melting up. Yes, we're starting to see rapid advance in robots, and we're also seeing digital twins of people. If you haven't looked at Reid Hoffman's digital twin, it's ingested his books and it can answer questions about his books pretty well. So huge productivity gains coming. And this is my version of the chart that shows costs going down. Here's the cost of an exascale going down, down and down. And here's the GDP per employee going up. So costs are going down, productivity is going up. And I do believe that we're going to start to see courses, smart courses will be transformed to have more upfront e-learning. So the students take it's the flipped classroom thing. They take the rote learning up front. And then when the faculty are interacting with the students, it's about the faculty's research interests, and it's about the skills tuning for the jobs they're going to have in the future. So I expect this is the kind of transformation I expect we're going to see, and it's going to be kind of like a Moore's law of education. And there's a link down here to a paper if you're interested in this Moore's law of education that I've been talking about for almost over 20 years, perhaps. And there's additional food for thought as well, but there's only one thing I really want you to take away from this chart, which is service providers will not be replaced by AI, but trusted service providers who use AI well and responsibly will replace those who don't. So that's my opening remarks. And now we can begin to get some speculation about the future. And we're going to start with you, Dan. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so we can see you better. And Dan, if you want to wave, and please introduce yourself a little bit more.
Sure.
Tell us about your work.
Actually, I added a few slides. So if you try reloading your presentation, that would actually be helpful.
Oh, my goodness.
One of these gym meetings.
You must have added them like in the last 10 minutes.
No. I added about an hour ago.
Oh, an hour ago. Okay.
It's a little known issue with Google Slides, which is that they don't update. If you've already got it open, it's in prezo mode, then it doesn't update behind the back.
Okay. So
which actually is a sort of interesting lead-in, because my entire career has actually been about how do people understand complex systems? How do they understand? I've worked on the intersection between human-computer interaction and AI since I got my PhD, which was decades ago, shall we say. In any case, so there, when Jim sends out the links, you can actually go look at those. And so let me tell you a little bit about me and where I come from here, which is I started in AI. And so I've been involved in how does all this stuff work and how do people understand it for a long time. I recently retired, as Jim said, from Google, where I was sort of the lead user experience researcher in the search group. So if you've ever used Google search, I can't imagine any of you have not. You've used something that I have touched or have affected or modified or something. So I've been there for a long time. And what I've done in the past is ever since I started at Google, well, actually ever before that, when I was still at Apple with Jim, I've been teaching university. So I have 25 years of experience teaching living students. You remember those, right? Not digital twins, the actual breathing biological people with brains in their heads and so on. So I've spent a lot of time actually teaching university. I've also taught roughly 300 classes in K-12. So I've actually been in a fourth grade classroom teaching the fundamentals of information literacy and how to search and all that stuff. So I've got a lot of practice talking to real students and actually developing courses and all that. So right now, for example, I co-teach the HCI and AI class at Stanford with Peter Norvig, who you might have heard about from AI. I'm also teaching, don't ask how, the magic of travel. But I also teach at the University of Zurich in Switzerland, so I go back and forth between the two. Perhaps most relevant to this discussion is that I developed in 2012, so a while ago, right? You can do the math, 12 years ago, a little more than a decade ago, I developed a MOOC. Remember those? Massive open online courses. 10 years ago, when we would have had this conversation, we would have been talking about MOOCs. Remember those? So I've had in my MOOC, Power Searching with Google, about 5 million students go through it. And I'm going to come back to that, but I just wanted to give you sort of context that I've been doing a lot with education, online education, in-person education, always teaching people how to use this incredible wealth of technology that we have. And Jim, I'm going to do something for you that you will appreciate. Beep. Go back one. There's okay, that's it. Okay, well, maybe we've only got the one slide. So the update wasn't perfect. Yeah, well, I'll talk about this slide. That's fine. So in the MOOC space, this was an experiment that I ran probably 10 years ago. So we had the MOOC running, and we had every time we had 100,000 students, 500,000 students, whatever. So this is a chart that shows a study that I ran. What we did is we enrolled a bunch of students, roughly 100,000 students. So the end here is roughly 100,000. So reasonable data set. And what this is, it shows you the period before September 24th is what people did in their search behavior before they entered my MOOC. The blue area is their progress in their search skill while they're taking my course. And then the period after October 10th is the period after the class. The interesting thing to note here is ignore the red line for a moment. What happens is that people come into my course at roughly a 0.4, 0.5 skill level. I can tell you later about how that's measured. They take the course and surprise, surprise, they get better and better up until they score roughly 2 by the end of the class. Awesome. My course works. I'm happy. The thing that I should have realized is that after the course ends, at the end of the blue period, their skill level immediately drops. And I thought, wow, this is depressing. But the good news is that by 2 weeks later, things have stabilized at twice their entry level. So the reason I'm bringing this all up to you is that online educational resources and technology like MOOCs really can have a persistent effect. It's fantastic, right? This is a really, my contribution to the efficacy of online learning systems is to point out that these things really do work. And with AI, I think we now have another opportunity. So I think we will see charts like this even better in days going forward. So that's who I am. I know a lot about AI, a lot about education. I've taught literally millions of students. Or another way to think about it is I have been on somebody's little tiny YouTube screen for 425 years of 24 hours a day times 365, which is a staggering amount of teaching. And I'm glad to have done it. Back to you, Jim.
Wow, there is a statistic to remember. Did you say 425
Yeah.
what? 420
Years, 24 hours a day times 365.
Oh my God.
That's the number of hours. So you can, I just looked up all the YouTube watch times and all the stuff, and I just did the math, and it's like, holy cow.
That's a measure of something, Dan. That's enormous. So,
It's, yeah,
so how much will our digital twins scale beyond
right.
us? But that's amazing. Thank you so much, Dan.
Sure.
I'm gonna, we're gonna hold questions to the end, but feel free to put your questions into the chat, comments into the chat. If you want to know a link, put a request for a link into the chat. And I'm gonna go back and share my screen again. And this time I'm gonna just turn it over to Amanda. And I can do, Amanda, did you want to run your slides or do you want me to advance them?
I think you might have to. I don't see a way for me to advance them.
Okay, I'll do it.
But
So-
yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Diekman. I am a social psychologist. I'm in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Indiana University. And I'm also an Associate Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Affairs. And so that role lets me both be in the classroom and see other parts of the system that faculty are engaged in, and the hard work that faculty are doing to make all the, all the things happen, whether it's in the classroom or the research labs and so forth. So my work is, I'm a social psychologist, which means that I am not the kind of psychologist who is in any way prepared to conduct therapy with people, but I'm the kind of researcher who studies how people think about the systems and groups and processes in the social world. And so our lab has been really interested in questions of who goes into STEM fields and who stays away from STEM fields, even given qualifications and, like very good performance, excellent performance in terms of the kind of capacities and skills you would need. We see that some students steer away from the fields. What we found is a really robust stereotype that people generally think that STEM fields don't involve people, that they involve problems to some extent, but really kind of lab-based abstract problems, quantitative thinking that doesn't have relevance to helping communities or individuals in the real world. And we all know that that is certainly not true, that STEM fields are incredibly important and necessary for solving the challenges that we all face today, and often involve a lot of collaboration with other people. But anyway, because students think this isn't true, and sometimes those stereotypes are not contradicted in their gateway courses in STEM when they're doing those big lecture surveys, they don't always have contact, firsthand experience with those problems that can be solved. So it's really the students who stick around, who tend to, be white, they tend to be continuing generation, they tend to be male, tend to graduate with degrees in STEM. What we've found both in lab-based work, experiments, but also in intervention work, really working with STEM instructors and STEM classes through both curricular and co-curricular programming, is when we ask STEM instructors or when we highlight in experimental materials how STEM fields can address these important questions, can involve collaboration, can have some impact that matters for people in the world, which is not a hard thing to do, then a wider array of students are interested in it. So we still see those majority member students continuing. They are not dissuaded. This is great for them too. If anything, they're more interested, but also we see more underrepresented students join in, feel that they would belong, feel that they would do better, even given the student learning outcomes, kind of put out there by professional societies. They think they're going to learn more as well. So with work that is supported and in collaboration with Jayshree Saith, who's the Chief Science Advocate at 3M, our lab has been working really closely with select STEM faculty who are volunteering with us to co-create assignments that really help students to articulate their own purpose in STEM. Why are you interested in this field? What brought you here? What do you hope to do with your career in the future? And those very brief reflections we've shown experimentally have a positive impact for students. The challenge is when we ask and we study faculty and say, well, when if ever, do you talk about purpose with your students, they say, oh, you know, at the very end of the degree, in the capstone seminar, or if students come to office hours, which is rare. And so what we're trying to do is really introduce some of this in ways that are meaningful to faculty in those earlier courses, so that students can find a foothold in the field and continue. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, that PRISM project link is go.edu.edu/PRISM, and we'd love to have your feedback. So in terms of the educational transformation, we can go to the next slide. And if AI is going to help or hurt, I can say this is a question that faculty are concerned about, wonder about, have a billion different opinions about. As a social psychologist who studies context, like, our classic answer is it depends. It depends on a lot of things, and that's what we need to start to specify. That's where I think an understanding of humans and an understanding of the technology and their intersection is going to be critical. So if we want AI to be as useful as possible, then we have to pay a lot of attention both to empirical data about how it's used, who is using it for what purpose, and with what degree of comfort and certainty. And then also we need to always be mindful about how we're basing decisions on the quantitative data, empirical study of how human and AI systems are interacting and what those consequences are. I think in general, what we want to aim for is developing discernment about when humanity is especially needed and important, and when we can bolster the good parts of humanity and mitigate some of the weaker or less good parts of humanity with tools, because I think that that's an important piece. I think a direct implication of our work is, to the extent that people perceive AI as being removed from people, then more like people will be skeptical of that and distrust it. And then we'll get certain people engaging and certain people not. And that, of course, is going to influence the technology itself. And so the next slide just gives some contact information for me, and our lab website, the PRISM website, and then my email. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. All right. We're moving right along and getting those position statements out there. And again, reminder to stay on mute and put your questions or comments in the chat. And with that, I'd like to introduce Deb Stokes, our next panelist. Deb is also the president of ISSIP 2024 and is a leader at Dell in external research, and also part of an organization I belong to called UIDP, for University Industry Development Demonstration Programs. So Deb, what are your thoughts today on this important topic? And you've got an industry perspective, so I'm curious.
So I appreciate the intro, Jim. So I can just skip that part of my words and say more about what I really want to talk about today. So while I have been in the industry sector for well over 30 years or so, in various high-tech companies, global high-tech companies, I took a short sabbatical for about 2 years and worked at our local community college. While I think we've all had the experience of going, and yes, I have to say, from grades 1 through 12, because we didn't have kindergarten when I started to first grade, and then doing your advanced degrees. I finished up my master's degree a number of years ago. The fact is that there is a population that we don't often think about when it comes to education, and that is our adult education sector. Now, I know many of us will go back to school, take a short course, LinkedIn courses. I'm sure there's ISSIP courses that you can take and get certifications, but there is a broad part of the population that is around adult education. That is, how do they upgrade their skills? This is technical skills that we all need, because when your air conditioning goes out, believe you me, we want to call somebody who knows how to fix an air conditioner, right? There's also a segment of the population that, for whatever reason, did not complete their high school credentials. And so part of the program that I worked with was the adult education, how to help people get those high school credentials that they needed to either go on and get an advanced degree or get the credentials just to be able to work in the US. Great example there's a population of people that come to the United States to work from other countries. And I'm talking, these are doctors, lawyers, physical therapists. They have a professional background and certifications, but they don't know how to speak English. So there's a large group that we dedicated to working on English as a second language. How do we get these professionals to be able to speak in a new country so that they can do the jobs that they have been educated to do? And so I think this is a population, we tend to think about the kids that get left behind in some of the rural areas of America and other countries. But there's a population that we really need to look at, are eager to learn, are eager to advance in their careers. And this is where I think that, AI is a benefit to help some of those individuals in personalizing their learning platform could be a tremendous asset. Using AI to specify this is exactly what you need to work on, personalize that curriculum, if you will, rather than just saying, here's what you need to take to get your high school diploma, and good luck with that. It really becomes more of an opportunity to personalize and customize what some of these folks need. The other thing I think is that, and it surprised me. I changed some things around in the curriculum because we were asking these adults to come take these, high school education courses from 8 to 3, Monday through Thursday. And I pushed back to the administration at the time. I said, so what's wrong with this picture? These are people that, for whatever reason, could not go to high school from 8 to 3 every single day, but yet you're asking them to do the same thing as an adult. So we did some customized programs where you could do some online learnings, where you could come into the lab after hours and do some of those projects and works. And I think having AI accessible for those kind of individuals, again, to go back and look at, this is what you need to take. This is how you need to take it. These are the kinds of certifications that you need to be prepared to cover whenever you finish up these degree programs. So I think that's just a huge opportunity for a segment of the population that we somehow, it gets lost in all the noise around advanced technologies and future directions. Where I think there's potential harm, and I think this applies to all of us, if you will, not just in the education sector, but it's really about bias and fairness. Again, I will take the point of, if you're a person coming into the United States who can't speak English, there tends to be a bias that, well, you can't understand me, I can't understand you, when in reality, you can really understand each other, but you just need to work at it together. So I fear that AI is going to put unfair bias into the systems so that creeps in, because again, we're relying on human data to run AI, and humans are biased sometimes, and they're not fair, and they just don't know how to react. So I think this is a really opportunity, if you will, to try to build into these systems the fairness and unbiased approaches to make sure that we get a diversity across our AI frameworks. And I think one last topic that I think is very important is, okay, who takes their phone and watches it at the airport, reads something, who's watching YouTube off on the side right now? We have an over-reliance on our technology. And what I fear particularly, and this again comes more into the lower end of our education, our elementary and junior high students, is that no one is learning how to do critical thinking anymore. No one is really thinking about being creative. And there's really, how do you use AI for your interpersonal skills? Because if you're constantly using your devices and accessing technology, it is really a challenge. And that's something that I think we really need to look at, because AI can't make you have a conversation like we're having this afternoon. That just doesn't quite work that way. Now, it's going to be absolutely lovely when Jim runs the AI and we get a very nice summary of what we have talked about this afternoon. But AI is not going to come up with that on its own. Jim is going to coach it and say, these are things that I would like to have coming out of this conversation this afternoon. So I think that's a challenge across the board, not only for education, but in other areas as well. And as was pointed out to me at a visit to MIT a couple of weeks ago, AI is not creative. People, human beings, are creative. So we can't lose that part of the equation as we look at how AI is going to change our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Wow. Yeah, I totally heard that underserved segments of the population and AI helping them. I agree. Huge opportunity there, and the challenges were well said as well. So thanks, Deb. Um, our last panelist is Frank Mellis, and Frank, did you want to run the slides, or would you like me to? You're going to do it? Oh, I can't hear you, Frank. You're on mute. You're on mute, Frank.
I will do that, Jim.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks for allowing me. I trimmed it down to only 3 slides to make it easy for tonight. So let me, can you see this?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me for tonight. My background is for the first half of my career in corporates, working for companies like Philips, Digital Equipment, AT&T International, Bell Labs, and finally for IBM. And the last half, I'm working as an entrepreneur. And when I take a look at the many years I'm working, the constant theme is innovation. And what I would like to share with you tonight is a bit of innovation we have put into economic development with the title Growing People and Economies at Scale and Speed. And that within the context of transforming the economy towards green, digitalization, and inclusion. We're a company going through an enormous growth right now. We are implementing our technology in Europe and in Africa. And I would like to share you some of the learnings we have had over the last few years. And the most important thing is on the slide already here. And this is what we have developed, and that is the social architecture. The social architecture is the way how we look at the economy. And I would like to thank Deb for her introduction, pointing to the relevance of not only taking a look at students at the university, but also you and me, we all are students constantly in our lives. And the question, how does that work? How is that organized? And how do we organize ourselves? We came to the conclusion that there are 4 key stakeholders. The region, I come back to that in a second. Of course, employers, individuals, and the educational institutions. Those are the 4 stakeholders we address. And let me share you a few statistics from Europe and also a few from Africa, because that is where we gain our knowledge from right now. In Europe, we count, as per today, roughly 22 million employers. And out of the total volume, roughly 90%, 90%, are smaller than 20 staff. And in total, they represent roughly 50% of the labor force. And I would like to repeat those numbers for you. 22 million employers, 90% are smaller than 20 employees. That is 20 million employers. And in total, they represent roughly 110 million employees in Europe. And there is big news to share with that group. They have no infrastructure. When we are talking also tonight about skills and skills gap and how to develop yourself, for a large amount of the labor force, there is no infrastructure to talk about skills, to define the skills that you have, to discuss the skills gap, to come up with guidance how to solve the skills gap. It's all superficial for at least 50% of the market. When we take a look at what's happening right now in Africa, the numbers are staggering. There is little infrastructure at all. There are roughly 800 million mobile devices. But when we are talking about how do people present themselves as individuals, walking the green line, to employers, well, that's all still geared based on the traditional CV. Many people don't have the writing skills to present themselves in a professional way. Some people in the West, in the Northern Hemisphere, are saying, the solution is AI. But most of the people are not using AI for writing help, for writing support. So what have we done? We have created a set of games to help people to profile themselves in terms of what is your passion? What are your strengths? What are your skills? Those 3 levels. Just playing 3 little games, and the results of the games are being put in artificial intelligence, and we match the people with 3 outlets. Are you potentially qualified to become an entrepreneur? Second, can we match you with personal learning advice to take action and close your skills gap? And the last one is, how can we help you to find an internship, an apprenticeship, or regular work to make a decent income? Those 3 elements. And what you see on this map is 4 colors. There is a 5th one, that's the gray line, and those are the AI connections that we have bundled into our application. I can share many, many more elements of relevance of this chart. For the moment, the most important thing is that you see 2 orange lines on the right-hand side. That is the orange line for the job seekers, and on the left-hand side, there is an orange line for the job creators. There are 2 different animals, and we help them to develop themselves in 2 different directions. On the left-hand side, the question is, how can we help people from an individual perspective to grow into an employer perspective, into the blue line, with the goal to create new companies and to create new jobs? Yes. And we do that at scale and speed, with project sized somewhere between 50,000 and 500,000 people in one project. Why do we do that? We do it because we want to create socio-economic impact at scale and speed. We have created something that is called the economic development funnel. Time is too short to dive really into the logic of this, but we are working together with the OECD on taking out the critical data from our data model and put it into a conversion model so that we can help decision makers to offer them the handles to create specifically jobs and enterprises in a certain direction they want to accomplish within their own region. This is where we get a lot of traction from governments in Europe and in Africa, and that is the focus for the moment. And Jim has asked me to share a few thoughts or a few learning elements that we have learned over the last few years, and those are 6. Let me share them with you very, very quickly. What we see happening is that economic development is moving away from national focus to regional focus. That is happening throughout the world. Organizational development, what we see more and more happening is that organizations are breaking out from legal frameworks into fluid networks. I give you one example. We are now working on a project with 500 SMEs where they have less, again, than 20 staff. They are too small to put a lot of money in R&D for specific development of green plastics. They came together and now they have the cloud to work on that. And this is a fluid network that we are implementing based on our platform. Skills development. I would like to share the following with you. Everybody today seems to talk about the relevance of skills, but I think it's a too flat pancake. There is no energy in skills. Skill is you have an underscore. That's the talk of skills. And what we need to do is to bring positive energy into the equation by addressing passion and strengths to allow people mentally to grow their skills in a positive way. Closing the skills gap, it is already mentioned, moving in the direction, Deb already mentioned that, in the direction of hyper-personalized learning. There is a lot that we have learned from the profiling work we have done within Smart Bio. Data analysis, of course, moving to microdata, and a word that is not that often used, but I would like to insert it here in ISSIP network. It is economic nudging. So to use the statistics and help people to take action in a certain direction for socioeconomic impact. And finally, talking about socioeconomic impact, I think decision makers are still living in a dark room looking for the exit. They have no access or very limited access to microdata. And I think we have to move away from long tail guesswork to instant evidence-based models. And that is something where AI, we think, can be a huge help to allow a continent like Africa to move into the Western world much, much quicker. And also for the Western world to do the transformation of the economy at a much higher pace and at a larger scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And I'd like to just give a moment for people to reflect. And down at the bottom of the screen, there's a little heart that says react. And if you click on that, there is a raise your hand at the very bottom, raise your hand. So if you'd like to raise your hand and ask a question, go ahead and do that. Before we ask for participants, Vittal, did you have any reflections that you wanted to share after the four panelists?
Thanks, Jim. I'll just throw it out there. When I was a relatively new assistant professor, my former dean acquainted me with Peter Drucker's quote that I shared in the chat. And in 97, Peter Drucker forecasted that in 30 years, the large campus universities will be relics. It is actually a fact, and I shared a quote. I think there was also several articles around this back then. I'd love to hear people's thoughts from their vantage point, where they see the current model of universities down the road, 10, 20, 30 years from now.
Great, thank you. And Dan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think he's completely wrong. So
I agree with you.
You tipped your hand earlier, Jim, when you said that you believe the residential university will persist. And I think that's true. I've in fact counseled multiple university presidents on this and said that there's a real point, there's real existence proof that residential universities are valuable because of the social network connections, the kinds of integrative experiences that you get, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, go on. So I think Drucker is just totally wrong. However, some places will go away, right?
Yes, some will go away.
Some will go away, and that's not evidence that the large places that have a real residential value add will go away. So I disagree with the premise in general, but I do believe there will be transformation of the university business.
Exactly. And just to add on that, I think the ability to concentrate expertise with the best equipment in the world and have students get access to some of the leading thinkers of the world, that kind of stuff doesn't go away if you can transform. So Vittal, you're right, some will go away. Dan, you're right, the ones who make the transition, there's so much value there still. So Amanda, any reflections before we open it up for Q&A?
Yeah, I just agree. And I think we saw from the pandemic, actually, when we came back to residential, like the students have very high standards, like if college is just going to be sending, like showing PowerPoint slides in a one-way transmission, they can get that and do get that on YouTube. But if it's engaging with people next to you and having them really ask you tough questions, then they are really here for it. And so I think it's making instructors level up in some ways, which I think is a great thing.
Very nicely said, Amanda. Deb, your hand is up. And I was going to call
So
her.
I think that we've already seen the movement of universities, as you were saying, from the during the pandemic, a number of universities rose to the opportunity to teach online courses, to transfer some courses that they needed to move to online learning opportunities. But at the end of the day, there were still those classes that needed to be held in person. You really can't do a lab experiment without being there hands-on, and nobody can really afford to build the labs that you find in the major universities, right? So I think there's going to be a mix, that the schools that will continue to exist in the form that we, the big buildings and name buildings and so forth will continue, but those will be also the ones that will adopt quickly to the digital transformation of being able to offer online blended learning, if you will. I think that we will find a rise of other schools that will come up. I mean, they're here now offering full online education courses that you can get your full degree from, and that's a new model that's emerging. But I think there's room for both, because again, part of the reason you go away to college is to go away to college, to have interpersonal activities, to learn some creativity, to hear some different perspectives than what you've heard in the past. So I think Drucker's wrong on this. He's been right on a lot, but I think this one's wrong. And he probably missed the fact that there was going to be a pandemic, which was going to force that you'd have to have a blended operation for education.
Very good, Deb. And before we
Let,
go to,
let me just chime in on what Deb just said. And we get now students who got schooled in the Zoom classes, as you call it. And we see, contrary to the statistics that Dan presented, they didn't really learn much. And we are paying the price for it currently in the classroom. So that's also because probably we didn't really have the time to deliver content online during COVID, not to take away from that. And lastly, I personally failed miserably to teach the more advanced graduate level course that has a lot of abstract thoughts and models, mathematical models, over Zoom. Other classes may be okay, but not the more advanced class. So maybe it's self-preservation, but I certainly hope that the large campus survives.
so I want to get to Mark's question, but before I do that, Frank, we think of universities, most of us think of the teaching. Okay, yeah. Some of us think of the research and those great labs. Yes, of course. That's one of the reasons why they'll persist, is that concentration of funding for labs. But the third leg of the stool is called the entrepreneurial university. And the universities that will survive are the ones that are the regional economic development centers of their region. And would you agree that there's a need for the future of universities from the entrepreneurship perspective, or what are your thoughts? You can disagree, of course.
No, I think there's a great demand for that. But let me first reply to what the previous speakers brought up, that the best education is happening within a physical class. Let me share you one example. We implemented a project within prisons. And the interesting thing, what we learned was it was not the teacher or the coach that was helping the inmates, but it was the inmates themselves. So the relevance of peer reviewing was key. And within this context, it was the key in capital letters for the success, bringing back the recidivism. Sorry for that. It's a difficult word for me to pronounce. The recidivism, that word, within a large population, well, for Dutch standards, 35,000 inmates, bring it back by 20% in 4 years. That is huge. That was not delivered by teachers and coaches, but it was delivered by an infrastructure in which the inmates could relate to themselves and help themselves to move forward. I would like to bring that into the equation. And now back to the question of Jim. I think for the moment, this is the era of entrepreneurship. You're coming in from the US. You are the example of the relevance of entrepreneurship. But when I take a look at what's happening in Europe and what's happening in Africa, this is the era of entrepreneurship at this side of the world. That's happening right now. And this is happening at scale and speed right now. That is being celebrated. And there are many forms of taking action. And let me share you one. That is COIL. I'm sure you are aware of this, Cooperative Open International Learning. How can I, as a student, find another student in my project team to create a project? How does that work? Is that happening in a physical class? Very often not. And youngsters know how to do that. We should celebrate that. It is not a physical class. This is the thinking of the old. I'm sorry for that's the thinking of the old. Yeah. We are past, or the market has passed that level. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. All right. I see Mark Prensky's hands up. Mark is one of our newest ISSIP ambassadors. He's written about the third millennium kids, and he's the coiner of the term digital native, which is one of my favorite terms. Mark, you got your hands up.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. I'm very happy to be here. I had conflicting events, and I chose this one, and I'm very happy I did. So thank you all for being here. The way I look at this is slightly differently. Because somebody mentioned self-preservation, Vittal mentioned self-preservation. We have a system that said, here's what young people need to do between the ages of, say, 17 and 21. They need learning in advance in education. They don't need to be out working. They don't need to be doing this. This was the system that we created. And then we decided, and that was literally 5 to 7% of people in the world until roughly World War II, when we said, let's expand it to more and more and more people. But the interesting thing that has been brought up in so many different ways is that is not necessarily what people need, learning in advance. It was highlighted that we need the social peer-to-peer interaction. I totally agree, because the best thing that 4-year residential experience brings you is 4 years with your peers. And the best people in the world for the universities are the admissions officers, because they create a group of peers that will be good to interact with each other. That's what an admissions officer's job is. So we have the peer thing. We're now seeing that the accomplishment stuff is important. That's the entrepreneurial side. So that's a great thing for people to be doing in those years of whatever it is, 17 to 25, so that they're actually involved in the market of the job market. And my perspective, so it's not that we don't need something for young people in that age group. It's just that what we've had for them in the past is old and not changing enough. It's really learning in advance, and learning in advance in the era that we're in, where everything is in your pocket, where you can do this, where it needs to be extremely individualized, one-on-one. That learning in advance in classes is just not useful anymore. Deb said, and I took this quote out of your presentation, Deb, and I hope you take this. Okay, you said this is what you need to take, right? That there's a system, and maybe even some of the system. This is what you need to take, and that I don't like getting on a train for everybody. This is great if it's for one person. If it's you, this is what you need to do because I understand who you are, and therefore I can help you. That is a fabulous kind of coaching. But the idea of putting up courses and trains and that's Frank, why I liked everything that you said except for the train analogy, because I don't think we should all be getting on the same train. So anyway, I just want to consider this not from the perspective of how universities that exist can change, but from the perspective of what can we build that serves the people of the third millennium who are now in various age groups.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. So we are rapidly approaching the top of the hour and the end of this education session. And I want to just see if anyone else, I'm scrolling through the chat, and I see comments from a lot of people. I'm just wondering if anybody who made a comment in the chat, you don't have to raise your hand, just speak up if you
Jim,
want.
there is a hand up. Alka Roy.
Oh, Alka, I don't see your hand up. Please, please speak if you'd like. We can hear you a little bit, Alka. You're faint.
Let me see.
I know Alka just got back from Alaska, so Alka, you're not in
Can you hear
Alaska.
me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can-
Well, thank you. I'm still processing a lot of things I heard today, and I appreciate everybody, and I try to sort of comment on those. I think Mark mentioned something that maybe is to the point, I come mostly from the industry and innovation centers. And when I went and taught a class at Berkeley or did the online thing with Linux Foundation, one of the things that was really enlightening for me to go from industry to education was trying to understand how much of the information was being retained by the students, because they seemed so stressed out. They just wanted to know how to get a good grade, get on with it, get to their next thing. Like critical thinking, somebody mentioned about these other skills. I was teaching a multidisciplinary class for an engineering, a lot of engineering students and business students there. It was around AI and responsible innovation. And I had to pause and step back to talk about just critical thinking. They were just not looking at information. And I don't mean critical thinking, but just looking at information in a sort of nuanced way, understanding it truly, instead of just saying, what's the grade? How do we move on? So I think there's a lot of discussion about how do we survive? How do universities survive? How does, this or that survive? I think what if we shifted the conversation away from survival to what is relevant and useful? What is just not our new generation, but what do we all need, truly need, and put technology or, just expanded the silo approach to education, and became a little bit more creative and innovative with how we approach education itself. It has become such a business and just such a, we're just churning the same kinds of engineers out. That's why Google and Facebook educates product managers and, engineers, like, this is how we want you to work. This is how we want you to think. So I think, since so many educators are here, that's just something that's on my mind that I wanted to bring up as well.
Thanks, Alka. Let's see. I don't know if Irene is out there, but I see some stuff on productivity that looks kind of interesting. I wonder if you can come off mute and tell us about your comment there about productivity. I'm always interested in that. Hi, Irene. Yeah.
Hi, Jim. Hi, everyone. I actually have 2 points, and it's great that you brought up. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So there were 2 points. The first one, I think, sort of building on what Alka said, I think we tend to think as educators that the students come to us sort of like an empty vessel in their mind, and it's sort of the Freyerian deposit model that, oh, look, you're here, I've got stuff to give you, and we deposit in, and there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of competition. So a key piece of insight recently that just came out to me, it's not recent, it's about 6 months ago. Someone told me that 85% of 18 to 24-year-olds start their TikTok with the words "how to." Now, that suggests to me that when you're coming into university, you're not coming in with a blank slate. You're coming in with a lot of fake information, all kinds of preconceived notions and all sorts of stuff. And I think that's something that as educators, we kind of, we think about our generation, yes, kind of went in with a blank slate, but not this generation. They're coming in with a hell of a lot of full slate. And I know that we're talking about critical thinking, but I think it just is slightly beyond just critical thinking. It's about, you know, that idea of, you know, a blank slate. How do we deal with that? And the second thing is, thanks for mentioning productivity is currently my biggest bugbear, because we're about to create a fund, what we call the equity building fund, to help plug the gap between the venture capital world, which is all about entrepreneurship, that's about ventures and follow a rather formulaic style, and the growth equity, because a lot of micro businesses now accounting, as Frank has said, more than 50% of the world, probably not the US. Jim totally acknowledged that, because the micro businesses and the micro firms the wave hasn't started yet. But again, if you look at how many people wanting to become digital nomads, micro firms are really starting to grow. And what happens, we can see the world over, is that's a real struggle, because when you get into a micro firm in your own firm, you do not have the kind of support in public infrastructure to really help you grow. In terms, you know, we in our generation, we spent 25, 30 years, we built equity through dumping all the money that we earn into the house. So the house built equity for us. 30 years later, we sell the house, hey, we got equity, right? But now you don't do that. You start working for yourself really early. You don't have pension, you don't have equity, you don't know how to build equity. So, and productivity goes down. I know that a lot of governments around the world are really, really worried about that.
Interesting. So maybe we need a new measure, which was the point of this whole meeting, is what are our new measures, and what can be counted may not count or count. Anyway, we are at the end of our time. I want to thank our panelists once again. I want to thank the participants. It's been a blast, and we will be back with another industry sector, which I'm sure will be exciting to you, hospitality and retail. And they seem to be embracing digital transformation very, very rapidly. After that, we have supply chain, and after that, IT and energy before we round out the year. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
all.
Bye now.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.